A 63-year-old man walked into a coffee shop last month, and within seconds, three women in their 40s turned to look at him. Not because he was famous, not because he was loud, but because of something specific about the way he moved, stood, and existed in that space. And what I'm about to share with you are the exact body parts that triggered that instant, almost involuntary attention. These are the physical features women scan for in milliseconds, whether they realize it or not. Here's something that might challenge everything you've been told about aging and attraction. Most men are taught to think about attraction as a contest they eventually lose. Younger face, bigger muscles, more hair, more energy. And when those things begin to change with age, some men quietly decide that their days of being noticed are over. But attraction is far more complicated than that. A woman doesn't simply look at a man's body and create a checklist of measurements. She is also responding to movement, expression, confidence, presence, grooming, and the emotional meaning those physical signals create. Nonverbal communication research has long shown that facial expression, posture, gaze, gesture, and movement all contribute to how people perceive one another. And if you've ever walked into a room and suddenly felt invisible, I want you to think about something. Maybe the problem isn't that you've aged. Maybe you've simply stopped showing the qualities that make your age look confident, alive, and interesting. Because there is a huge difference between looking older and looking like a man who is comfortable being older. If you're over 50 or 60 and you've ever wondered whether women still notice you, tell me in the comments. Have you ever caught someone looking at you and wondered what they saw? Or have you started assuming that women simply don't notice men your age anymore? Share your experience, because someone reading your comment may be feeling exactly the same way. And there is another reason this matters. Attraction after 40, 50, and 60 is not necessarily about pretending to be 30. In fact, trying to look or behave decades younger can sometimes work against you. Mature attraction can be connected to qualities like confidence, authenticity, curiosity, emotional presence, and the feeling that a person is fully alive in his own life. Esther Perel has written extensively about the relationship between intimacy, confidence, autonomy, mystery, and desire. One of her recurring ideas is that desire is not simply created by closeness. It can also be stimulated when we see another person fully engaged in their own life and experience them as more than someone who simply exists for us. Mary Smith, host of Senior Mindful Living YouTube channel. And today we're going to look at 5 physical areas that can communicate much more than physical appearance alone. Not because every woman reacts to the same feature in exactly the same way. She doesn't. Attraction is individual, cultural, emotional, and deeply personal. But these areas can become powerful parts of the overall impression you create. And the first one is surprisingly simple: your hands. Think about how often your hands are visible during an ordinary interaction. You're holding your coffee, opening a door, reaching for your wallet, gesturing while you speak, resting your hand on a table, shaking someone's hand. You may not think about your hands at all, but hands can communicate care, cleanliness, confidence, activity, and even temperament. There's an important distinction here. You don't need perfectly manicured hands. You don't need to look like you've just stepped out of a luxury spa. In fact, a man who has clearly lived a practical life can have hands that tell an interesting story. The important thing is maintenance. Clean nails, reasonably moisturized skin, no obvious neglect, and perhaps most importantly, awareness of how your hands move. Imagine 2 men sitting across from a woman at dinner. The first man constantly taps his fingers, adjusts his watch, touches his phone, moves his hands rapidly, and repeatedly hides them. The second man gestures naturally. His hands are relaxed. When he speaks, his movements have rhythm. When he listens, his hands become still. Neither man has said a word about confidence, but their bodies have already said something. This is why one of the easiest exercises you can do is incredibly simple. The next time you're having a conversation, notice your hands without trying to control them. Are you constantly fidgeting? Are you gripping something? Are your movements rushed? Then practice slowing them down. Not artificially, not like you're acting in a movie. Just slow down. Purposeful movement tends to communicate more composure than frantic movement. And there is something else interesting about hands. They can reveal whether a man actually participates in life. Maybe he gardens, maybe he cooks, maybe he repairs things. Maybe he paints, builds furniture, plays an instrument, works on cars, or simply takes care of his home. Those activities create something that no expensive outfit can manufacture: evidence of capability. Now look at your own hands and ask yourself a different question. What story do they tell? Because the second feature is connected to exactly that idea. Your forearms. Yes, your forearms. This is one of those features that many men never think about until someone points it out. Yet forearms are visible in ordinary situations in a way that many other parts of the male body aren't. A man rolls up his sleeves to wash his hands. He reaches across a table. He carries a bag. He works in the garden. He adjusts something around the house. Suddenly, the forearm becomes visible. And what makes it interesting isn't simply muscle, it's function. Forearms are associated with gripping, lifting, carrying, building, working, and physical capability. For an older man, maintaining functional strength can also support independence and everyday confidence. So don't think about this as, how do I build impressive forearms for women? Think about it as, how do I maintain a body that allows me to participate fully in my own life? That shift is important. Walking regularly, doing appropriate resistance exercises, carrying groceries safely, gardening, using light weights if they're appropriate for you, practicing grip strength with guidance when needed. The goal isn't to become a bodybuilder. The goal is to remain capable. And there is something psychologically attractive about a person who appears capable without constantly needing to prove it. That's a recurring theme here. The most compelling signals often aren't the signals that scream, "Look at me." They're the ones that quietly communicate, "I'm comfortable being here." And that brings us to the third feature, your eyes. Now, obviously, people notice eyes, but the fascinating part isn't necessarily eye color, shape, or whether you have wrinkles, it's attention. Imagine you're talking to someone and their eyes keep drifting toward their phone, toward the television, toward another person walking across the room. You don't need a psychology degree to know what that feels like. Now imagine the opposite. You speak and they look at you. Not intensely, not in a way that feels invasive. They're simply there. They listen. Their facial expression changes as you talk. They smile when something is funny. They become thoughtful when you discuss something serious. That is presence, and presence can be incredibly powerful. Research on facial expressions shows that authentic smiling and expressive facial behavior can influence perceptions of qualities such as genuineness, attractiveness, and trustworthiness, although the effects are more nuanced than the internet often suggests. This is also why the lines around your eyes don't automatically need to be treated as defects. Those lines may be evidence that you've laughed, you've smiled, you've spent years outside, you've experienced things. Your face is a record of your life. The goal isn't to erase every sign of age. The goal is to make sure your expression doesn't communicate that you've emotionally checked out of life. Here's a practical exercise. The next time someone is speaking to you, put your phone away completely. Don't prepare your response while they're talking. Instead, listen for 1 extra second before answering. Notice their expression. Notice the emotion behind their words. Then respond. That tiny change can transform the feeling of an interaction. Because sometimes what another person wants isn't to be impressed. They want to feel seen. And that brings us to the fourth feature, perhaps the most important physical signal for a man over 60, your shoulders and posture. Posture is powerful because it changes the entire visual impression of the body. A man with rounded shoulders, a lowered head, short, hesitant steps, and a collapsed chest can unintentionally communicate withdrawal. Now picture the same man standing upright, shoulders relaxed, chin level, breathing comfortably, and walking at a measured pace. Same face, same age, same clothes. Completely different impression. And this isn't about puffing out your chest or walking around like you're trying to dominate everyone. Good posture isn't aggression, it's openness. It's the physical message that says, "I'm here." Research into nonverbal communication has repeatedly examined posture, gesture, gaze, and body orientation as important components of social perception. For men over 60, posture can become particularly meaningful because it affects not only appearance, but also how you move through everyday life. Try this right now. Sit or stand naturally. Now imagine the crown of your head gently moving upward. Let your shoulders relax downward rather than forcing them backward. Keep your chin roughly level. Take a comfortable breath. Don't exaggerate it. That's the difference. You aren't pretending to be younger. You're simply allowing your body to occupy its space. And here's the deeper psychological point. Confidence doesn't always begin in the mind. Sometimes you can reinforce a confident emotional state by changing what you repeatedly do with your body. If you spend months walking with your head down and shoulders collapsed, that posture can become your default. If you repeatedly practice standing comfortably, walking deliberately, and looking forward, that can become more natural too. Of course, if you have pain, balance problems, osteoporosis, arthritis, or another physical limitation, don't force your posture into an uncomfortable position. Work within your abilities and speak with an appropriate healthcare professional or physical therapist when necessary. Because the goal is not perfection. The goal is presence. And now we come to the fifth feature, your mouth. Not simply your teeth, not simply your smile, your entire mouth and the way it moves when you communicate. Think about the difference between someone who speaks while mumbling, rushing, and barely moving their face, and someone who speaks clearly, pauses naturally, smiles when something genuinely amuses them, and allows their expression to match their words. The second person often feels more alive. And that's important because the mouth sits at the intersection of communication and intimacy. Basic dental care matters. Regular dental checkups, brushing, flossing when appropriate, attention to breath, and addressing problems rather than ignoring them can make a meaningful difference in comfort and confidence. But don't underestimate expression. A genuine smile is different from a forced smile. Research on Duchenne and non-Duchenne smiles has found that smiles involving the characteristic movement around the eyes are often perceived more positively and as more genuine. Although researchers also emphasize that smile perception is complex and depends on context and the overall facial expression. So don't practice smiling at women like you're trying to activate some psychological trick. That's not the point. Instead, find more reasons to genuinely smile. Tell stories, laugh, ask interesting questions, talk about something you care about. Let your face participate in the conversation. And here's a small exercise that can change the way you communicate. When you're talking to someone you genuinely enjoy, stop trying to think about how you're being perceived. Instead, become curious about them. Ask yourself silently, what is interesting about this person that I haven't discovered yet? Curiosity changes your expression. Your eyes become more engaged. Your face becomes more responsive. Your body becomes less rigid. And suddenly, attraction doesn't feel like something you're trying to manufacture. It becomes the natural result of being fully present. That's why I don't want you to walk away from this video thinking, I need to fix 5 body parts so women will find me attractive. That would miss the entire message. The deeper lesson is that your body communicates the way you live. Your hands can show care, your forearms can suggest capability. Your eyes can reveal presence. Your posture can communicate vitality, and your mouth can express warmth, confidence, humor, and openness. None of these guarantees attraction. There is no body part that makes every woman interested in you, and anyone promising that is selling you a fantasy. But you can become more attractive by becoming more attentive to the signals you're sending. A 63-year-old man doesn't need to compete with a 30-year-old man. He doesn't need to pretend he is younger. He needs to become the strongest, healthiest, most present version of the man he actually is. Think about that coffee shop again. 3 women turned toward the older man. Maybe it wasn't one magical body part. Maybe it was the combination. His sleeves were rolled up, his hands were relaxed, his shoulders were open, his eyes were engaged with the barista. He smiled naturally, he moved without hurry. And perhaps most importantly, he looked like he enjoyed being alive. That's the part many men overlook. Attraction isn't always about perfection. Sometimes it's about aliveness. So here's your challenge for the next 7 days. Take care of your hands, move your body appropriately. Spend a few minutes each day practicing comfortable upright posture. When you speak with someone, put your phone away and give them your full attention. Smile when you genuinely feel like smiling. And once a day, do something that makes you feel capable. Fix something, cook something, walk somewhere new, call an old friend, work in the garden, learn something, create something. Because the most attractive thing about aging isn't pretending that time hasn't changed you. It's showing that time has changed you and you're still deeply engaged with life. If this message gave you a different perspective on aging and attraction, share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you've ever experienced a moment when someone unexpectedly noticed you later in life, tell us what happened in the comments. You may think you're the only one, you're probably not. And if you want more conversations about confidence, relationships, psychology, and living with greater purpose as we age, subscribe to Senior Mindful Living and turn on the bell. Because getting older doesn't mean becoming invisible. Sometimes it means becoming more fully yourself and finally learning how powerful that can be.